Hit subscribe to this channel right now. President Trump on Truth Social has been talking about this to my super chat. Thank you. Let's get started. Go to H.A. Goodman's other channel right after this for the upload synopsis of this live stream. Again, to my super chat, thank you so much. Let's go.
Saying this: if the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of ICE who are only trying to do their job, I will institute the Insurrection Act. Many presidents have done this before me and quickly put an end to the travesty that is taking place that in that once great state, writes the president. The president also posted about a federal judge declining to block ICE operations in Minnesota. The judge was appointed by former President Joe Biden in 2021. And we are following this fast-moving story as well in Minnesota. Joining me now is former actor.
So there are tragedies taking place, and it's horrible and it's terrible. But the problem is that President Trump won every swing state. He won the popular vote. If Democrats or protesters didn't like these policies, Democrats simply should have won. The way to protest, the ultimate protest, is your vote. If you end up losing every battleground state and the popular vote to President Trump, and also Biden's administration had a 10-year high in deportations. Notice how NPR in 2024, well, here, deportations under President Biden have hit their highest point in almost a decade. The number of removals conducted in 2024 by ICE has surpassed those conducted during the first Trump administration. Where were these somewhat peaceful but also, chaotic protests? And also, it is not legal. You cannot put any ICE agents, their lives at risk. You cannot interfere physically in any way with an arrest. It is also not legal to follow ICE vehicles or federal law enforcement. Okay, you cannot follow police vehicles to interfere with police conduct or business. It becomes illegal if it involves interfering, obstructing, or hindering federal agents from conducting their duties. It is not legal to follow and track federal law ICE agents or federal law enforcement officials, because the people doing that are not simply tracking them. They're trying to literally block, impede, obstruct the arrest of people that have been either there's a criminal warrant, or they've had criminal indictments, or they're wanted in other countries, or they fall within existing deportation statutes. If you don't like the statutes, then amend them or repeal them. Instead of Democrats to simply amend and repeal. There's a $1 to $8 billion scandal in Minnesota right now. And the issue is Democrats, Walz, Fry, and others trying to say, oh my God, look, ICE is creating all this chaos. When in reality, they benefit from all the tragedies. Democrats benefit from the tragedies. And the protesters, unfortunately, are not doing one thing to prevent ICE from arresting people, unfortunately, that are either the deportation statutes apply to them, or there's a criminal warrant for their arrest for some, despicable, heinous, evil, monstrous crimes. Either way, they're not doing anything but impeding law enforcement. And President Trump won the popular vote. So I'm all for peaceful protest. I think peaceful protest is important. I don't really know if Democrats or people in Minnesota, by and large, or at least, I don't know if there's a certain percentage that believe in peaceful protest. It's always a quote-unquote resistance operation where there's civil disobedience that ventures into illegal activity. And unfortunately, oftentimes or sometimes they're protected by local officials. But let's listen to this.
Director of the FBI, Kash Patel. Director, thanks so very much for being here this morning. And I know that this is a DHS investigation, but there is outrage across the country that there is another killing. Someone is dead at the hands of Border Patrol. What can you tell us?
Great to be with you, Maria. And look, Secretary Noem stated it perfectly. You do not get to attack law enforcement officials in this country without any repercussions. You do not get to do that in Minnesota, LA, or anywhere else. And the interagency is leading the charge out there. We've already arrested with the interagency those that violated the FACE Act and impeded a peaceful prayer in church. We've already just last night arrested 4 more individuals involved in the damage of government property that we saw the videos of online. We've arrested other individuals who've made threats to law enforcement online.
Where were these individuals when Biden had a 10-year high in ICE and the ACLU and immigration groups were condemning Biden? Family detentions under President Obama. There's a Guardian article we always talk about on this channel. Orphaned by deportation. Warrantless searches. All of these things took place under Biden. Every single thing that's taking place now took place under Biden in one way or another. And the way that liberals or progressives or, people who don't like ICE, the way they rationalize this, they say, well, we're still moral because this, and that didn't happen under Biden. Oh, yes, it did. You don't get a 10-year high in 2024 without all the things that are taking place. And he surpassed arrests and detentions from President Obama's first administration. I mean, President Trump's first. He did more with ICE, Biden. Democrats did more with ICE than President Trump's first administration without apps tracking agents and without all of this chaos and mayhem. So the question is, where was Don Lemon? Where were protesters during Biden's administration when they were breaking records in terms of arrests and detentions? There are numerous articles. We always talk. You can go to H.A. Goodman's other channel, a segment prior to this one. You see numerous articles of Biden's administration doing exactly the same thing as President Trump is doing. And without the chaos and mayhem. That's part of the Insurrection Act. It's part of why eventually President Trump, or ultimately this week potentially, he'll bring in the U.S. military. Because Tim Walz and others don't get to look back and say, oh, well, if only ICE would leave. They're federal law enforcement. States have no right to tell federal law enforcement not to enforce federal laws. End of story. It's basic civics. And if you didn't like President Trump's administration, you shouldn't have lost the popular vote in every battleground state. And you should have also protested with the same energy during Biden's administration. But that never happens.
So we are not messing around. It doesn't have to be in person. If you threaten law enforcement officials or civilians, we are going to come find you. And as for this latest shooting, yes, DHS and HSI are the lead, and the FBI is processing the physical evidence. So we're in possession of the firearm, which is going to go to our laboratory. But as Secretary Noem said, no one who wants to be peaceful shows up at a protest with a firearm that is loaded with 2 full magazines. That is not a peaceful protest.
I mean, I respectfully disagree in terms of if the person is not anywhere near the federal agents, I believe they have a right to, if you have a license, a carry license, a concealed carry license, I believe that if you're not impeding, you're not doing anything wrong. The issue is whether the person was impeding, and that's the problem. It's when these tracking apps are tracking the federal immigration agents, what's happening is they're not just videotaping and tracking. They're trying to obstruct. They're putting their car in the middle of the road. They're yelling and screaming and insulting and hitting the ICE vehicles with their hands. That is illegal. It is illegal to do.
And you do not get to touch law enforcement. You do that anywhere, this FBI is going to be leading the charge to arrest those.
But how was he threatening Border Patrol? You've collected the evidence, you said, right? You have the handgun in your possession?
The real estate market is changing fast.
And how was he using that handgun in terms of threatening Border Patrol? What was the threat? He had his camera, right? He was filming it.
That's something that I will let the DHS and the prosecutors, because they are the ones investigating that case. I don't want to stylize that evidence, but I trust the men and women on the ground who are trained professionals to only use it when it's absolutely necessary. And I trust Secretary Noem's leadership and DHS and HSI to do the right thing, as they've always done in these scenarios.
Kristi Noem said that the individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. Was the gun visible, or did Border Patrol see the gun after they shot him?
Again, that all those pieces of the investigation are being led by DHS and HSI, and I don't want to.
Look, it could have been the person who lost his life could have very well not been reaching for anything. Okay, so that could have been the fault of the federal government. That could have been the fault of, if there is a scuffle, the person might not be reaching for the, what he's carrying. The hands in a scuffle might go towards the side of the body, and then the ICE agent could have believed, hey, wait a second, he's reaching for a weapon. We don't know from that video. None of these videos are clear. And a lot of these videos, and this is the thing. Two people should be alive. Two protesters should be alive. I don't want these protesters to lose their lives. Okay, I was on the left my whole life up until recently, like 8 years ago. I understand the mentality. A lot of these people are good human beings, but they're indoctrinated to believe that Trump is literally a despot and authoritarian. They think that they're going up against a modern day, authoritarian despot tyrant. He won the popular vote. He won every battleground state. So that's not the case. Biden literally surpassed Trump's deportation numbers while Democrats were in office. So I get it. I understand that there are good people, but then there are indoctrinated people who think that they're fighting against injustice, and this is not the case. These are existing deportation laws that Democrats passed in Congress, and that Democrats and liberals in Congress and progressives in Congress funded. They funded, maybe not all the progressive politicians, but they funded ICE, and they added ICE the budget. They increased the budget for ICE. The issue is that these people should be alive. The two people should be alive. What happened is, the stated goal of the quote-unquote protests is to get the ICE agents scared, frightened, nervous. The protest theme is they should never have a moment of peace. Well, you're then getting chaos and mayhem on the ground. Then what happens is these federal law enforcement officials are stressed beyond belief. They are completely stressed out. And when there's chaos and mayhem, like, we just had sirens. Like, yeah, you're creating a chaotic environment where armed law enforcement, and this only helps Democrats. You think Tim Walz doesn't want more people to suffer? It's almost certain that Walz and others in Minnesota want this mayhem so they can circumvent repercussions legally from the fraud, billions in fraud that the FBI is looking at. So this, and Walz doesn't even deny that there's fraud. The issue is whether he knew. He's been indicting like 90 people of the same community that he claims to defend. Not all, but like I said, God bless the Somali community. I don't, want to paint anyone with the same brush. There's veterans, teachers, business owners, all the great people. But the issue is that they should be alive. But what happens on the ground is these quote-unquote protesters make everyone so, it's so chaotic. It's so, they're hitting cars, they're yelling, there's sirens, they're impeding traffic, they're impeding and obstructing arrests. And there's apps where they're going and tracking these officers. And then there's threats on the officers. And then 2 people lost their lives. Well, when the video of a person, when there's a video and you hear the tragedy taking place, and they're like, why are you doing this? Why are you there creating chaos and mayhem, putting your fellow, citizens, colleagues, protesters, Americans at risk? They're creating the most chaotic, stressful environment where federal agents are already fearing for their lives. Then the unspeakable takes place, tragedy takes place. And like, if only ICE wasn't here. Well, ICE deported a whole bunch of people in Minnesota. Okay, hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of people. I think it was like close to 2,000. That was either 1 year or so it was hundreds and hundreds in just 1 year. I was trying to look the numbers up. But they in 2024 under Biden, they reached 10-year high. They surpassed Trump's deportation and arrests under Biden and Democrats without all of this chaos and mayhem. When you create chaos and mayhem with sirens and yelling and hitting cars and obstructing arrests and putting your vehicle to block federal law enforcement vehicles, you're increasing the likelihood that there's an unspeakable tragedy. Those two people should be alive today. I wish they were alive today. But the organizers of the protests should really think about, like, what are they trying to accomplish, aside from, like, Tim Walz wants chaos and mayhem so he could blame ICE and Trump, as opposed to addressing potentially legal repercussions from the fraud. So all that chaos on the ground is just hurting and increasing the likelihood that people are going to lose their lives. And I don't want anyone to lose their lives.
Comment on their ongoing investigation.
I understand, but you have the evidence. What can you tell us about the evidence you collected?
It's sent to our FBI laboratory where it'll be fingerprinted. We'll use ballistics examination toolkits to see if any casings were fired, and we'll examine all the casings that were found on the scene.
How much of this has to do with some of the rhetoric, in your view? Just 2 weeks ago, the governor, Tim Walz, told residents to get their phones and...
Really quickly, ladies and gentlemen, I know I don't want to interrupt the FBI director, but listen, that woman should be alive today. That person should be alive today. With that firearm, he should be alive today. What happens is when that woman was blocking traffic, she should be alive. The federal law enforcement official was in front of the car. Theoretically, could he have gotten out of the way without firing his firearm? Yeah, theoretically, he could have. So Democrats and media say, well, he could have. He could have is not a rebuttal. He should not have been in front of a car that's speeding in front of him, or the car should not have been moving in front of him. He had the right to be in front of the car. He had the right to demand that she get out of the car. She was in the middle of traffic. She should be alive today. Could he have jumped out of the way like a matador? Could he have jumped out of the way? Just looking at that, yeah, he probably could have without discharging his weapon. We don't know what he was thinking in real time. Whether he could or could not have, when people say he could have just simply moved out of the way, inherent in that statement is that he should never have been forced to make that decision. And all that chaos on the ground is putting people in precarious, very, very precarious and dangerous situations. And the only people that benefit are Democrats that have $1 billion scandal right there that the FBI is looking at.
Start filming whatever is happening, and when they see Border Patrol. Listen to this. This is just 2 weeks ago from Governor Tim Walz. Watch.
If you see these ICE agents in your neighborhood, take out that phone and hit record. Help us create a database of the atrocities against Minnesotans, not just to establish a record for posterity, but to bank evidence for future prosecution.
He is doing that because he is under criminal investigation by almost certainly, maybe not officially under criminal investigation. There's almost certainly a criminal investigation pertaining to Walz's knowledge, whistleblowers. He is trying to evade a future criminal prosecution of himself. He might be, he's being investigated right now. Whether there's an open criminal probe of Tim Walz, I'm not exactly sure. But he is saying, please go ahead and help me circumvent any potential prosecution because of billions of fraud under my watch. And look at the caring that he has for his fellow citizens in Minnesota that he's supposed to govern. Look at the care and love. He wants people to potentially lose their lives, potentially be in harm's way. You can go ahead and video, but it's not just the people who are videoing are not just videotaping. They're doing other things too that are potentially illegal that cause a dangerous situation.
Your reaction?
I think that type of rhetoric is exactly what's leading to violence against law enforcement that is totally baseless and unnecessary. And for the state CEO to do that against our law enforcement community is disgusting and revolting. And it should be examined thoroughly as to anyone who's involved in inciting this type of violence. It is absolutely improper, unlawful, and will not be tolerated any type of violence against law enforcement.
But it's not stopping. People are mad at ICE and want Border Patrol to stop. You saw what's happening right now in Minneapolis. People are protesting in the streets, pushing Border Patrol out. How will this end?
This will end thanks to President Trump's brilliant leadership to always back the blue. Law enforcement will hold the day. The Constitution, the rule of law will hold the day. It is a tough time right now, but I believe that our law enforcement officials on the ground, DHS, FBI, local police force across the country are moving in the right direction, and we will quell these riots and we will prevail. That's what we always do.
And what are you looking at when you're investigating or probing the evidence that you've collected? What specifically are you looking for?
At this point in this part of the investigation, it's mostly scientific evidence. We're looking for fingerprints and DNA and how many rounds, if any, were fired and any other sort of physical evidence in and around the firearm.
And, thousands of people are marching through Minneapolis. They are targeting the Border Patrol.
Democrats should have won at least one battleground state, shouldn't have lost the popular vote. That is the ultimate protest. The ballot box, when you're voting, that's infinitely more than trying to go ahead and block or impede law enforcement. Democrats went from championing Capitol Police to vilifying ICE agents when they didn't vilify ICE agents, and this is important. When Biden had a 10-year high in deportations, that's the issue here. That needs to be part of the legal equation as well. Why weren't there protests when Biden was deporting people?
It feels like the rhetoric and the protesting is only ramping up. What is your advice to the people right now who are outraged that this is a second killing at the hands of Border Patrol in 2 weeks?
5 years ago, the U.S.
He said you cannot bring a firearm loaded with multiple magazines to any sort of protest that you want. It's that simple. You don't have that right to break the law and incite violence. We will, of course, always protect your First Amendment speech. And if you peacefully protest, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you have seen a trend here, not just in Minnesota, but across the country in these protests turning into violent scenarios and people attacking law enforcement. That's when you go over the line, and that's when law enforcement steps in.
Well, you also have Democrats in general criticizing Border Patrol. It's not just the people who are protesting this. You've got the Department of Justice serving grand jury subpoenas to Minnesota Democrats in this investigation of obstructing ICE, according to reports. What can you tell us about that?
That is a very much ongoing investigation that we are actually involved with and leading out on. So there's really not much I can say, but I can tell you this generally. How do you do an investigation? You make a demand for records when you believe that there's probable cause that laws have been broken, and you make a demand for records of those involved. And in this case, that's exactly what we did of every elected official that was involved. And then the next process, generally speaking, we'll be putting people in grand juries. That's what happens in these investigations.
Director, let me switch gears. You've also been taking down some of the most wanted fugitives, and you've arrested a list of them. Tell me what you've been focused on and how you've taken down these fugitives.
Yeah, thanks to President Trump's amazing leadership and protection of law enforcement, and thanks to our great partners at the Department of Justice. This year, the Attorney General and us, we have arrested in 2025. We arrested and captured 4 top 10 of the FBI's most wanted. 4. And to put that in perspective, in the Biden administration, they had captured 4 in 4 years. The
Biden administration, unbelievable. But here, listen to this.
Yes, now former acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf and Fox News contributor Jonathan Turley, because we have operational legal questions. Thank you both for being here with us. I want to start with you, Chad. Would these officers have been wearing body cameras? Will we get access to that at some point?
Well, the vast majority do not have body cameras, but as we know, there seems to be more and more video coming out. So I don't think the lack of video will be the issue here. I think we need to let the investigation play out, right? Because the FBI, if they're leading the investigation, they'll dig into all the video that we've seen, but they'll also do a lot of eyewitness testimony. They'll also try to understand what happened before, what were the instructions the officers were giving to this gentleman. And so all of this provides context. What was the threat picture like? Did they understand? Did he announce that he had a concealed weapon as he approached the officers? I assume he did not. So a lot of this is going to get taken into consideration as that investigation unfolds.
Yeah, and we were just talking, literally just before I came to set,
So he should be alive today. The issue is that the Democrats in Minnesota are creating such chaos and mayhem simply to blame ICE for the chaos and mayhem they create. So if there were no protesters, there would be no, if there were no protesters potentially engaging in illegal activity, if everybody's simply peaceful and they're far away from the law enforcement officials and they're not in their faces and banging on cars and all of these things, you'd have probably a different scenario. It's a chaotic scene, mayhem, chaos, agents fearing for their lives, and there are deportation statutes just like Biden, that have to be enforced. If Tim Walz doesn't like the deportation statutes enforced, then he needs to, with Democrats, alter existing deportation laws. A 10-year high under Biden. The issue is that I can't really tell from the video footage. You can watch it yourself. I don't think we're going to see any of the footage. It's very difficult because that man should be alive today. That woman in the car should be alive. The issue is that these are precarious, ambiguous circumstances with a chaotic environment created by quote-unquote protesters that want to impede the lawful mission. It's a lawful mission of ICE. If you think it's immoral, that's another story. If you think it's immoral now, why didn't you think it was immoral when Biden had a 10-year high in deportations? I wonder how many. I think it was well over 1,000 plus arrests in Minnesota, either in 1 year under Biden, something along those lines. You didn't hear this under Biden because ICE was able to do its job. So Biden, and then 2014, President Obama was in office, used ICE also, but there weren't conservative protesters impeding and blocking and getting in the faces of ICE agents and threatening them. So these are situations that are created to cause stress for the federal agent, and when the stress boils into tragedy, then the person videotaping, "What are you doing?" It's like you helped create all of this madness. The best thing would be simply to repeal or amend existing deportation laws. But then these protesters would have to get Democrats to listen to them, and it's a one-way street. The Democrats make the protesters do their bidding. The protesters don't get Democrats to actually do what they want.
I saw a new video I hadn't seen before. I mean, they just continue to crop up, which will be helpful for investigators. I want to play something that Governor Walz said about this, because there's been this talk that when state investigators showed up, that they were blocked from gathering evidence and looking into this. Here's what the governor said about the investigation moving forward.
Minnesota's justice system will have the last word on this.
You realize how, there's a certain sinister sentiment that Tim Walz is evoking when this type of tragedy takes place. Look at his mannerism. Look at his mannerism now. Do you think this is the mannerism of a man that is really upset, or this is his moment to deflect from a multi-billion-dollar fraud fiasco that he potentially knew of or was a part of? So listen to this man.
It must have the last word. As I told the White House in no uncertain terms this morning, the federal government cannot be trusted to lead this investigation. The state will handle it, period.
Like the state handled the fraud issue, like the billions in fraud. So he benefits. This is what the protesters don't understand. And I was on the left my whole life. The Democrats are using the protesters, not the other way around. The protesters, the best thing that happens to them is that you have Democrats shielding them. The illegal activity, and okay, maybe, they can get a favorable judge or court or district or politician. But at the end of the day, these protesters are risking their lives. They're not changing even one law. They're not preventing even one arrest. They're causing a situation where people, innocent people who are on the left, I want them to live. I want them to live happily, and it doesn't matter if they're left or right to me. They're putting themselves in danger, and only Tim Walz is benefiting. Not one illegal immigrant or undocumented immigrant or one person being deported, whether they have a criminal record or not, is being benefited by any of the protests. Not one, not even one. And I don't say that gleefully. I don't say that belligerent with malice. Biden's administration deported a 10-year high. Biden's administration, warrantless searches, private prisons, all of the, go and look up what the ACLU and other immigration rights groups said. All of the things that take place now are taking place under Biden. Were taking place under Biden. The exact same things, but they didn't have chaos and mayhem on the ground. And you didn't have a $1 billion fraud scandal that Tim Walz wants to circumvent. The more people that lose their lives, God forbid, politically, it unfortunately benefits those who want to circumvent billions in fraud. So I don't see mourning or remorse from this man. I see a politician that wants to use these tragedies, almost certainly or potentially, to circumvent the billions in fraud that he's accused of allowing take place.
So, Jonathan, how does that showdown play out as we try to get answers?
Well, it's not true. I mean, this is unfortunately politics of the lowest kind, in that the governor is saying something to the public that's simply not true. This is a shooting involving a federal officer. Federal government is allowed to conduct its own federal investigation. The state cannot dictate who or when that investigation occurs. They can have a parallel investigation. That is certainly within their right, and I can understand why they would want to do that. But when he says that they and they alone will have the...
They don't want a parallel investigation because then the federal government will ask the state investigators, well, who funded these protests? Who is funding these protests? We have questions. Who is funding the protests? What apps have been used to track these ICE agents? Again, the apps that are being used, they're not lawful when you physically interfere. Physical interference will get you prosecuted. Yelling at the ICE agents in their face, in many ways, can be viewed as either assault, it's either a misdemeanor or a felony. If it's intended to intimidate or impede law enforcement, legal, you cannot follow police officers. You can't do that. Okay, and also, it becomes illegal. Tracking ICE agents is illegal if it interferes with, obstructs, or hinders federal agents. That's the entire point of tracking the agents, is to interfere. There's this view that civil disobedience or resistance is covered by the First Amendment. It's not. It's certainly not covered. They're committing criminal acts and then wondering why you have completely stressed out law enforcement officials involved in tragedies. Yeah, those two protesters should be alive today, 100%. They should be alive today. The reason is that you have local Democrats who are turning a blind eye to chaos and mayhem that are created to impede law enforcement, federal law enforcement, from doing exactly what Biden did without the same obstructions. So it's just unbelievable.
Final word. It's not going to happen. And it's part of the complaint against the governor that he is out there fueling a lot of this rage and encouraging people to go out in the street to film these officers, which is fine if you do it from the sidewalk. In this case, you had someone who was impeding the officers, told to get out of the street, return to the street. And we have to drill down on what actually occurred in those final moments. The legal standard here is clear. Did the officer act reasonably in these circumstances? The court does not second guess split-second decisions. But we need to know. We have to see his hands. We have to see what happened at that moment right before an officer is heard saying gun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a critical point when that happens. Staying with the legal beat on this, local officials there also say they're going to go to federal court tomorrow to try to get this entire operation shut down, to try to get ICE blocked. What do you think are the odds?
0. And, previously, the governor and the attorney general went in to try to stop the feds from bringing in more personnel to investigate fraud. These have absolutely no constitutional foundation. They may have some political benefit, but they have no legal recourse here in limiting the federal government. These are federal law enforcement officers. Despite what the governor said, where you told actual people to not treat them or refer to them as law enforcement, they are law enforcement officers, and they're allowed to enforce federal law.
Well, there's something that Secretary Noem said last night. If we could just work together, and she talked about a lot of jurisdictions where they are working federal officers, ICE, Border Patrol, with localities that do have Democratic leaders, and that this is not the situation that we're seeing in Minneapolis, that they actually have, deported tens of thousands of people through these targeted works. Now, I want to play something that Bob Jacobson, he's the public safety commissioner there in Minnesota, what he said about working together with the feds. Here's what he said last night.
If there are violent offenders or violent criminals or violent crimes, we will investigate and we'll bring those to justice. If the federal government would like to work with us, to continue to work with us as they have in the past, to locate those violent offenders.
So this is what the politicians in Minnesota, well, if you work with us with the fraud, it's like Tim Walz doesn't get to dictate what President Trump does on a federal level. He's not going to dictate that. He doesn't get to. And so this is a sleight of hand. This is the typical doublespeak. He doesn't do anything. He does very little to nothing to enforce federal immigration laws. And then he says, then he's part of either organizing or giving tacit approval to mayhem and chaos. Then he says, well, if you'll just work for us, we'll help you. And so all the while he's circumventing responsibility for billions in fraud. So again, people are literally losing their lives. In large part because Democrats in Minnesota have a fraud scandal, billions of dollars worth, that they're trying to circumvent. And this is a very evil, sinister way of circumventing fraud. And a lot of it is fabricated because none of this happened. If this took place under Biden, I would say, well, that's just Minnesota. But it didn't. There was a 10-year high in 2024. Biden actually ICE surpassed arrests and detentions, deportations, then even more so than the first President Trump's administration. So this is just political theater. It's doublespeak.
Offenders, we are always open to those discussions and always willing to assist.
Okay, so is something getting lost in translation here? Because the feds are saying the locals are not helping us going after these. And he says if it's a truly violent criminal versus just rounding people up because they're in the country illegally, they're willing to help. Where has this broken down? Well,
it'd be interesting to understand what they are defining as violent, right? So if you're a criminal illegal alien, that's who ICE is interested in. They lodge detainers. Many of those detainers are not honored by places like Minneapolis and others. And so that's what ICE needs, which is the ability to go into those jail settings, both there at the local level and throughout the state, and to remove any criminal illegal alien that is in a jail setting. They can do that without going into the neighborhood. I mean, it's very clear that both Minnesota or Minneapolis is not working with DHS and ICE in that way.
In some states, I forgot which state it was, might have been Wisconsin, I'm not sure, but ICE, if a state works with ICE and says, okay, well, here's an undocumented immigrant, they have a criminal record, they're actually in jail right now, or they're actually in prison. So if the state works with the ICE official will go into the prison or the jail and then detain and arrest and then deport the individual. What happens is, like, just to spite the federal law enforcement, some jurisdictions will actually allow the person to just leave the jail or prison, not notify ICE, and then ICE has to find the individual. Then ICE has to go into the community. Then the community then has a tracking app, and they're like, no! And oftentimes, the morally superior protesters are actually trying to protect inadvertently. They don't know. They're possibly, or in many cases, protecting a person that's committed heinous, atrocious criminal acts against vulnerable, innocent citizens of their community. So, like, the road to where was paved with good intentions, and nothing exemplifies that statement more than what's happening now in Minnesota.
Well, and how much of this lead up to this, because it's something that the Attorney General brought up yesterday, is when they've operated as sanctuary cities and sanctuary states in the past, it means that there is going to be a concentration of people that ICE or CBP is going to be interested in removing.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, ICE goes through a targeting system to try to identify where are the criminal illegal aliens. And if you did a heat map, the vast majority are in these sanctuary cities, not all. And I go back to your earlier point, like ICE does operations every day in places like Texas and Florida without any of this drama. And why is that? Because local law enforcement supports them, allows them to go into the jail, will go with them to provide that crowd control if they need it, if they have to go into a neighborhood to do an operation. None of that is at play in Minneapolis or a place like Portland or Chicago or anywhere else. And that's the issue. On top of that, you have the mayor and the governor saying they're not law enforcement, saying that they're propaganda machines. They are incentivizing their residents to go out and do these actions against ICE, and then that's where you have the issue.
Cali Boy 8415, Cali Boy 8415. Hello. Thank you so much for watching for so many years, and thank you for the super chat, the running interference. The real Minnesota story is daycare and Tim Waltz. Never forget. Exactly. Cali Boy 8415. I hope all is well. God bless you. Happy New Year. And thank you so much for watching for so many years. You're 100% right. It's interference. And Tim Waltz could be, I want to be algorithmically friendly. He could be a very sinister individual. Tim, imagine the type of human being, ladies and gentlemen. Cali Boy, thank you again. Imagine the type of human being that, because they're involved in billions of dollars of fraud, funnel or encourage idealistic, very indoctrinated or idealistic leftists or progressives or liberals or whatever, to be in harm's way with stressed out federal law enforcement that are armed. And then, like, the protesters, their mind, I read the New York Times article, and they're tracking ICE agents with social media apps, and like, we only had sirens, they were armed. Yeah, the sirens make the armed individual stressed beyond belief. That doesn't mean that they have the right to do anything illegal. But when you create the chaos, when Tim Waltz knows that there's chaos and mayhem on the ground, and he knows that this is like a crucifix to the liberal vampire ideology. Why deportations hit a 10-year high in 2024? The number of removals conducted in 2024 by ICE has surpassed those conducted during the first Trump administration. Tim Waltz didn't care at all. He didn't care at all. And the reason he didn't care is because it was Democrats doing it. He didn't benefit from. Do you think Tim Waltz would allow tracking of ICE agents while Biden was in office? It would never be allowed. Not in a million years would they ever allow that. But let's continue. Cali Boy, thank you so much.
Well, and then, of course, Jonathan, it raises all these questions that we keep hearing about the Insurrection Act, people saying we haven't met those conditions.
And by the way, Paul Bartlett, to my super chat. Paul, thank you. I don't think I thank you, but Paul Bartlett, thank you so very much, as always, in Australia. Thank you, Paul, all the time. Thank you so much.
Conditions in Minneapolis and Minnesota, but it's essentially if state authorities and state courts are not able to handle what is happening there, what's the legal path? Should the president pursue it or not?
Well, I'm hoping that the president will not have to use the Insurrection Act. If the question is whether he can, the answer I think most clearly is yes, he can. The act is generally worded. Courts generally don't second guess. It was used during the civil rights period when.
If God forbid another person loses their lives, he'll use the Insurrection Act. And Democrats will be like, what? No. Because there won't be protests allowed like this. You won't be able to track the U.S. military coming in. And so I don't want President Trump to do that. I mean, I don't want him to be forced to do that. This is different from a states' rights issue. Democrats are like, well, states' rights, I guess you don't like states' rights. It's like, no, it's pretty much different. You have a governor and other Democrats in a state that are trying to circumvent billions of dollars in fraud, like investigations, public relations, media focus. And they're saying, oh, look, it's ICE. They're causing all this madness. A lot of these protesters are from other states. They're being funded by Lord knows who they're being funded by. A lot of this is not legal. This is not First Amendment. This is not organic. This is not taking place at an organic ground roots level. A lot of this is because, again, it didn't happen under Biden. And the same things took place under Biden. When people say, well, not exactly the same, the exact same things in one way or another took place without this. So, I mean, you can't continue to have ICE isn't stopping. So the protesters, if they continue to make a chaotic, people are potentially going to lose their lives, and it only benefits politically Democrats who are involved in the fraud scandal, the billion-dollar fraud scandal. It doesn't stop ICE agents from arresting or detaining people who committed crimes or people who were here illegally.
Southern governors and officials also oppose the enforcement of federal law, different federal laws. This situation could be analogized to that. And what we're seeing in the city is this lack of local enforcement. You have ICE and Customs having to do crowd control in addition to trying to carry out these missions. And when the locals did take over the crime scene, by the way, they quickly lost control and they had to pull out. So all of that certainly can support that type of invocation. The danger here is that it's going to escalate this even further in terms of the tensions.
Yeah, that is a very real danger at this point. And our men and women in uniform and people in these communities.
So if this continues, he will invoke the Insurrection Act.
Is that they would partner with us, and before they let somebody dangerous out of their jails, that they would let us know so we can deport them out of our country. I do not know why they continue to choose the side of lawbreakers, criminals, murderers, and rapists over the citizens of Minneapolis. And this situation that we have today is a tragedy that we don't have to have. We have it because we have a mayor and a governor who encourage this violence and encourage this type of rioting. And remember, these are the individuals that were in charge when Minneapolis burned in 2020. They facilitated it, they encouraged it, and they saw the destruction, and we all watched the destruction of that city back then. It doesn't have to happen again. It appears that they're following the same playbook, and the reason that they're doing it is to distract from the corruption that they have facilitated in fraud and theft from the American taxpayers. Tens of billions of dollars they have been funneled into criminal pockets and stolen from vulnerable people that needed these programs to take care of their children, to go out and provide services to individuals that were developmentally disabled, people that needed programs that the federal government has to take care of those that are less fortunate and need it. And instead, Governor Walz and Mayor Frey allowed that kind of theft to continue, and now they want to perpetuate violence against our law enforcement officers to cover it up.
Secretary,
yes.
You just made claims that the individual posed a threat to law enforcement.
That is no claim. It is the facts. The facts of this situation. This individual showed up to a law enforcement operation with a weapon and dozens of rounds of ammunition. He wasn't there to peacefully protest. He was there to perpetuate violence. And he was asked to show up and to continue to resist by a governor who's irresponsible and has a long history of.
So it's been said that in every major leftist or liberal protest, there are it's been reported or said, potentially, people who are armed. Okay, so it's very interesting. There's so many, the way Democrats, they're all over the place. They're anti Second Amendment, but when they need the Second Amendment, it's there for them. So this is I'm not sure what the legality is. I think that ordinarily would be allowed to open carry. I mean, not open. Sorry, if he was not open carry, I'm not sure with Minnesota, but I believe if he had a concealed carry license, if he was far enough away from, I'm speculating. I don't know exactly the law. I'm saying if generally if you're far enough away from the protest, theoretically, if you had an open carry license, I mean, sorry, a concealed carry, you should be able to, that should be legal, as long as you're not impeding or doing anything illegal. But I'm not sure.
Corruption and lying. And we won't stand for it anymore. These law enforcement officers take an oath. They get up every single day and they go out to protect the public. Many of these individuals live in their communities. And this mayor and this governor have doxed them. They have allowed people to threaten them and their families and expose their identities in order to instill fear and violence. And that's not what America is about. We're going to continue to tell the truth about Minnesota, Minneapolis, what happened here, the theft over the last many years that these leaders have facilitated. And we're going to continue to do our work to get to the bottom of the investigations. And the one question you should be asking is the mayor, the governor, and the attorney general have all confirmed that they have been subpoenaed to come in front of a criminal federal grand jury. So they are covering up and are being in a part of a system where they are going to be brought to justice for anything that they had to do with this investigation. They have confirmed they've been subpoenaed, and they will be in front of a grand jury to get that criminal investigation unfolding and to disclose the kind of fraud that they have allowed to happen.
And do you have any plans to leave Minneapolis?
The White House has labeled the man who was killed in Minnesota as a domestic terrorist. Is that something you agree with? And have you seen any evidence to back up that claim?
When you perpetuate violence against a government because of ideological reasons and for reasons to resist and perpetuate violence, that is the definition of domestic terrorism.
So here's the issue. Okay. Both of the people who lost their lives don't truly fit what most Americans would feel is a domestic T. The issue legally, I don't even know if it's legally that they would fit that. The problem is that Tim Walz Democrats are putting lives in jeopardy by creating such chaos and mayhem on the ground and preventing and impeding. You saw those smoke canisters. That's not a response to a legal protest. It devolves into chaos and mayhem and illegal and criminal activity almost all the time, or a good percentage of the time. Then people who should be alive either impede, get into a scuffle, get themselves into a situation, unfortunately, with stressed out law enforcement, and then tragedy takes place. So, whereas I think Kristi Noem is right on most of the things she's saying, they're not what most Americans would view domestic T. Depending on, I mean, some of the protesters could be actually, like, depending on what they plan to do, could be viewed in that manner. But I mean, you saw people go after Tesla and try to destroy Tesla dealerships. Those are actually, that would be, fit that definition. But the people who lost their lives, I don't know if they'd fit that definition. The woman definitely did not. The issue is that the Democrats are putting lives at risk. The protesters are being used as pawns by the Democratic Party. And media is all a part of it. Media was nowhere to be found. Democrats were nowhere to be found. Nobody was impeding ICE deportations during Biden when he did more deportations than even President Trump's first administration. So let's continue.
This individual who came with weapons and ammunition to stop a law enforcement operation of federal law enforcement officers committed an act of domestic terrorism. That's the facts.
Where's the evidence of his ideology, though?
Drew Evans, of the superintendent of Minnesota Bureau of...
Well, again, where's the evidence of the ideology? The person should be alive today, but if you're at that protest, likely the ideology is that you very much are against, what's taking place.
Criminal apprehension had said during a news conference today that when federal agents blocked his agency from the shooting scene, When they went, got a judicial warrant, they returned, they were still blocked. Why were they
We
blocked?
have asked these state officials to help partner with us on law enforcement operations for months. Ever since President Trump came into the White House, we've asked them for their partnership to stand alongside of us so we could do targeted operations against criminal illegal aliens and to help us make their streets safer. They have refused over and over and over again, and they have perpetuated a narrative that is absolutely false. And our federal law enforcement officers will continue to do their work, and they'll do that to make America safe again.
Secretary,
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, this is the second DHS law enforcement operation shooting that's happened this year. There was another incident in Portland. 5 people have also died in immigration detention so far this year. Why is immigration enforcement becoming so deadly under your tenure?
Immigration enforcement is exactly what the American people asked for. When we had a Democrat administration in the White House,
So that's a question that's asked, well, why are things so chaotic? Why are people losing their lives? People lost their lives under Biden. Not a word was said. There was no chaos fabricated under Biden. ICE did not have to, nor did Biden have to deal with organized, funded obstruction of federal law enforcement. That's in large part why these things are taking place more so under President Trump.
that facilitated an invasion of millions of people over our southern border and let people come into this country that were completely unvetted. We know for a fact that we had hundreds, if not thousands, of terrorists, suspected terrorists, criminal organizations and gangs that came in and have been committing criminal activities against American citizens for years now.
CF Rob, exactly. President Obama was viewed as the deporter-in-chief. Let's continue.
United States Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection here in Minneapolis. Some of those brave men and women of Border Patrol and Department of Homeland Security law enforcement join me here today to show support for all federal law enforcement who have been under constant attack in Minneapolis for weeks now. This morning was no different. At 9:05 a.m. Central Standard Time, as DHS law enforcement officers were conducting a targeted operation in Minneapolis against an illegal alien, Jose Huerta Chuma.
5 years ago, the U.S.
About 200 rioters arrived at the scene and began to obstruct and assault law enforcement. Crowd control measures have been deployed for the safety of the public and law enforcement. This situation is evolving and more information is forthcoming. The officer was highly trained and had been serving as a Border Patrol agent for 8 years. The officer has extensive training as a range safety officer and less lethal officer. As mentioned, this is only the latest attack on law enforcement. Across the country, the men and women of DHS have been attacked, shot at, doxxed, had their family members threatened. And, as we have seen, more than 100 vehicle rammings over the past year against federal law enforcement. We will not allow violence against our law enforcement officers, and we need state and local help, state and local law enforcement, to help us coordinate to get violent criminals off the street. Mayor Fry and Chief O'Hare just a few minutes ago did the opposite of that by omitting the fact that the suspect had a gun and magazines full of ammunition. In what looks like a situation, again, where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. I want to reiterate what President Donald Trump, Secretary Kristi Noem, myself, Director Marcos Charles, and so many others have said time and again.
So the number of rounds, that could be an indication of intent to, or it could not, but that could be viewed definitely as an indication of something, really bad that was intended.
If you obstruct a law enforcement officer or assault a law enforcement officer, you are in violation of the law and will be arrested. Our law enforcement officers take an oath to protect the public. We go to work every day to protect our friends, our neighbors, and our fellow citizens. The fact of the matter is that the law does not enforce itself. It takes men and women who are willing to risk their lives to enforce it. The men and women of CBP and ICE, law enforcement, are highly trained professionals who love this country and do this work because they want to leave their kids and their grandkids a country that's safe and secure. Questions?
All right. Allie, go ahead. One question. First question, when did agents learn that he had a gun, and did he ever brandish that weapon at agents?
Allie, this situation, again, is evolving. This situation is under investigation. Those facts will come to light. This particular incident is being investigated just like we investigate other similar incidents like we've done over the past several years. It's in the hands of professionals. Those facts will come to light.
All right, going on to the next question.
So, did he have an additional gun, or was the gun moved from the scene? And I watched the video from start to finish of that woman who was wearing the red jacket, and it doesn't seem like he pulled the weapon at any point. So, did the account come from the agents? Did they say that he pulled the gun before, during, after? When does the gun come out?
Again, this situation's evolving. This is under investigation. Those facts will come to light. But let's take a look at the gun. You can see the gun here on the screen.
So it could have been a situation where there was a scuffle. I'm not really certain how the scuffle started. I looked at the video. Maybe you could see here.
We want to bring in Bill Malusian, who has been on this bill. I'm looking back at your emails since 10:37 a.m. this morning. We learned about this. You learned about it, rather, 20 minutes after this shooting took place. What are you learning this hour?
Yeah, Kaylee, good morning to you. So heard this happen a little after 10:15 Eastern time, and I'll start with what we do know. This was a Border Patrol involved shooting. This was not ICE. Border Patrol shot somebody who DHS tells Fox News was armed with a gun. DHS will counter that, well, if you would cooperate with us and work with us and give us the criminals in your jails, then we wouldn't have to be out doing roving patrols in the community looking for these illegal aliens who are.
So they don't, the Democrats, the way they work is they don't want to work with ICE and give the names in the jails. They want ICE to be roaming around in the community so then they could be targeted and followed and tracked by very idealistic. A lot of the protesters are very good people, good human beings. I disagree with them on a lot of things. You disagree with them on a lot of things, but they're Americans. They're good people. But they're risking their lives in large part to shield politically individuals at high levels in Minnesota who are potentially part of a multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme. And not one person, either with a criminal record or under deportation, under existing deportation laws, have been deemed by the federal government to be deported. Not one person. They're not preventing one person from being deported. It's just chaos, mayhem, and a spectacle that is. People are risking their lives, and they're doing so. But when deportations at a 10-year high in 2024, and that's the issue. Okay, it is not legal. It is not legal to track ICE agents when obstruction, hindering federal agents, interfering. When that all becomes part of the equation, it's illegal. So just like it was illegal to storm a church, a lot of the things that Democrats think is legal are not legal at all. Anyway, hit subscribe to this channel. Go to H.A. Goodman's other channel right now, right after this. To my super chat, thank you. And